Hi, I'm Josh Lindsay. Today I'm going to be talking with Peter Blackham. He is an amazing pianist. He's my accompanist, and we're going to be talking about singers and pianists and how they collaborate to make music. So, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
And so, tell me a little bit about your history in piano. What got you into playing piano?
My mom initially.
Yeah.
So I was the youngest of 5 children, and she taught all of us up through, I think, junior high or so. At that point, we were able to decide, do we want to continue with this or not? When I turned about 11, my mom said, I actually can't teach you anymore, so let's get a new teacher for you. I was the only child that decided to keep going. So my mom initially, I got a new teacher after that, and then when I was going to go to college, it was the obvious choice. There was nothing else that I really wanted to do. It was like, of course I'm going to do piano. So I applied, got accepted first year, and rest is history, I guess.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then you got into college,
Yep.
and then you did a bachelor's and a master's degree in piano performance,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So when you finished your bachelor's degree in piano, you had to make a decision whether you were going to go into piano performance for a master's degree or if you're going to do collaborative work, right? Like accompanying.
Right.
So why did you decide to go into piano performance and not accompanying?
Sure. There were actually a few options. There was the performance degree. There's a collaborative degree. Some places also offer a specific opera coaching degree.
Okay.
I think Butler does that. But for me, I wasn't totally sure whether I wanted to fully commit to the collaborative world yet. I enjoy doing solo works, even though I haven't done too many recently. And so doing the performance degree allowed me the possibility to still continue working on my solo chops, right? Which would also help me collaboratively, right? Be able to play more difficult works.
Yeah.
While not keeping me from collaborating, right? Whereas if I go on the collaborative route, then I'm closing the door a little bit more on the solo route.
Right. Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah.
So throughout your college career, you inevitably were accompanying a ton of people.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me a bit about why you became so popular as an accompanist. Everybody wanted Peter Blackham. Okay, because you were amazing.
Yeah,
right.
I would like to think so. There were definitely other students at college that were also very sought after. I was privileged to be one of them. As to what specifically made people want to, choose me as an accompanist, I'd like to brag and say I was, super good at piano. I was super personable. I'd like to think that there's a little bit of truth in all those things. I think I am a good pianist. I think I am pretty personable.
I think one of your strengths is that you're not only a fantastic pianist, but that you're able to listen and collaborate with the singer or with the instrumentalist. And that's a special skill that a lot of pianists don't have, right?
Sure.
They might be a fantastic solo pianist, right?
Yeah.
But you throw a singer to work with them and they can't do it.
Yeah.
Right. It's very hard for them to listen to another musician singing along with them and collaborating with them. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother technique in piano playing, right?
Yeah, that honestly fascinates me a little bit when I find people who seem to struggle in collaboration. Maybe because it's just something that I tend to be naturally good at. Again, I don't like to toot my own horn, but it seems to be the case that I am. It fascinates me when that's not easy for people to grasp onto. There is something in, really being able to pay attention to your thing, but also be flexible enough to listen to another person and work with them, interact with them, be able to follow them if necessary, be able to lead them if necessary in the music. I'm not entirely sure as to why that doesn't come so naturally to some people.
Okay.
But yes, that is definitely a skill that is important in collaboration.
For sure. Have you noticed this in other pianists that weren't able to accompany?
Yeah, I find that it's really just a quickness of response, really, to the person you're working with that seems to lack in some people. That they might be able to listen back to their recording and say, "Oh yeah, I didn't follow this person here, or I didn't really react to what they were doing." I think people are aware of it. I think it's just they lack that quickness of response.
Right.
Yeah, I've definitely seen people fall short in that. I've seen people who seem to have no lag time in response, that when they're working with a singer, they're able to just pick up really quickly on things that whether it's a singer or a dancer or a solo instrumental soloist, that they're able to pick up really quickly on what that person is wanting and put that into what they're doing.
Awesome. So how do you think you've improved as an accompanist from your time as a freshman to now? How do you think you've made progress in that regard?
That's a good question. I think there are some relatively hard skills that I've improved on. Obviously, I believe my piano chops have improved. I think I've increased in my ability, in my range of emotion that I can bring out of the piano, and the range of colors, confidence at the keyboard. I feel like those are some relatively hard skills that I've been able to improve on, as well as knowledge of language, knowledge of the general repertoire for collaborative works. I think those are hard skills that I've increased in as I've gone through my training. Some softer skills like being able to work better with people, I would like to believe that I've also gotten better at those. Knowing how to respond when your soloist or whatever group you're working with, knowing how to respond when certain things happen, whether they get off or they fall behind or they start rushing, or even in kind of the discussions that happen in rehearsal, how to work with different opinions, how to work with different personalities. I'd like to believe that I've gotten better at doing all those things too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So another question. So when you're working with singers, right, what are some of the pitfalls that that singers make when they're trying to work with accompanists?
Pitfalls. They don't listen to the pianist. I think, honestly, that's the biggest one. Just as pianists need to listen to the group that they're working with, whether it's a soloist or a larger ensemble, especially in a duo context, the soloist also, well, and again, I hesitate to say soloist because sometimes the pianist is the soloist.
Right.
Even in a duo or larger ensemble. But the singer or instrumentalist, I think sometimes they fail to listen to their pianist. It's very much an equal partnership. Sometimes the pianist has more importance in their part, and sometimes the soloist has more importance in their part, and those things need to be brought out at various times. And so just as it's important for a pianist to listen to whomever they're working with, similarly, it's important for that person to listen to the pianist. I think that's often something that those people fail to do. They fail to realize that they're not the only important one in the ensemble.
Right, exactly. I think also a lot of singers have a hard time with rhythm.
Sure.
They either speed up too much or they lag behind, or they're not in sync with the pianist, right?
Yeah.
And or often they'll jump measures, right? Because they're not looking at music, and so often they skip, or they forget a line, or there are myriad of things that go on while performing, right? And I think that sometimes as a soloist, inevitably, a singer is not going to be 100% perfect all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so have you ever experienced where you've been in a performance, a singer messes up, and you've had to catch them.
Oh yeah, tons of times.
That happens like all the time, right?
Yeah. Especially with, I mean, when you're working with, I mean, even professionals, right? Professionals, that'll also happen to them. But especially when you're working with students who are just at the beginning of their journey, that happens all the time.
Yep, exactly. So how do you catch them? So what do you do? Do you hear them and they say, "Oh crap, he skipped a whole measure," and
Right.
then what do you do in that circumstance?
The nice thing is that you hopefully had time to rehearse with them. And so there have been times when I know that they have a tendency to skip at a certain part. And so I may just go ahead and skip for them, and they're already there because I knew that they were going to skip some time. And so I prepared for it beforehand, essentially, right? But if it happens where we've rehearsed it and they've done it perfectly in rehearsal, and then because of nerves or whatever, or maybe it's something that they've tried to work out of their habits but haven't been entirely able to, and then they've done it in rehearsal, or in performance, there are times when that happens. It's something more unexpected than not.
Right.
And in those cases, you just have to make it work. It's definitely easier in some styles versus others. If you're talking about Mozart, where he may not vary too much from a certain modality, it's relatively easy to just say, okay, now I'm going into, from my 1 chord into my 2 chord, or, it's a little bit easier in that context, especially with a sparser texture when it comes down to either larger works or more romantic works where the texture's thicker. Maybe they've changed keys at some point. That definitely becomes a little bit more difficult. But you just do what you have to do.
Yeah, exactly. So here's another question. Yeah. So this is just about like rehearsal and not performance. Sure. So when you're working with singers, okay, and the singer barely knows the piece, right?
Okay.
How do you help them out?
This is in rehearsal?
Yeah, in rehearsal. So often, a singer won't know the melody and they're just sight reading it, right?
Right.
And then, and maybe it's a complex song. Yeah. And so they need maybe just a little bit of help getting on the pitch or a little bit of help with the melody. Okay. So how do you help them out?
That's a great question. And it also depends on context too. There are some people where you just say, if it's a pretty low stakes environment, you can just say, hey, let's not work on this right now. It'd be more beneficial if the singer just went home by themselves to work it out, right?
Right.
If you're in a context, though, where it's like, I need to help them out with this, then, and if I'm in that leadership role already, then it's pretty easy to just put the melody into the accompaniment and hammer it out a little bit for them.
So do you play the accompaniment and then you look at their line as well, and then you try to do a mix of them both?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And if they sometimes I'll just start doing that and they're able to get right back onto it.
Then you drop the melody.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's as needed.
As needed. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a very helpful skill for a lot of singers, right? It's like, and and a lot of pianists don't know that you can do that, right? Sure. You can, okay, I'm going to look at the top line and give them a couple of notes to get them back on,
right? And
then I'm going to go back to the accompaniment, right?
Yeah, and that's, again, I think that kind of goes back a little bit to what I was saying before, where a part of an ensemble may forget that they're part of an ensemble and how important that is.
Right.
I think some pianists, especially when they haven't done a lot of collaboration, if they're working with a singer, will just say, okay, well, I'm going to do my part, and if they do their part, then great, right? And just won't worry too much about it. But, there has to be a certain level of compassion when you're working with others, and understanding that this isn't just a solo work. And so, I don't think every pianist remembers that if it's not something that they've really worked on, or if that's a situation that they haven't often been in. And they'll forget, like you said, that they can do that, right? That it's absolutely welcome if they do that. The singer will be very thankful to them if they've done that. I think some pianists and others just don't really.
So here's another situation. So you've accompanied opera rehearsals before, right? I've directed operas and you've played for the rehearsals.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between accompanying for an opera rehearsal as opposed to a soloist singer?
Well, that's a good question. The difference is that in an opera rehearsal, you're playing a reduction. You're playing the orchestral reduction of what the orchestra will be playing in a performance, if you're going to have an orchestra, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so an orchestra versus if you're a conductor conducting an orchestra versus a single pianist accompanying a single singer, there's much less flexibility that conductor has as far as tempo goes in particular, compared to the pianist with the singer. I remember who told me, but I heard that conducting an orchestra is like driving a freight train, where it's difficult to slow down and it's also difficult to speed up. So there's not a lot of flexibility. So when you're in an opera rehearsal, there's a certain rigidity in the tempo that you have to have. Again, within a style, right? When you're playing more romantic pieces, there's going to be a sort of given rubato, but again, within the context of how much can an orchestra do. You also have to keep in mind what sort of orchestra might eventually be playing for that. For example, if you're at a university level, they may not be as flexible as a more professional orchestra will be. And so, again, keeping that orchestral mindset in mind, right? Is really the difference, realizing that the flexibility that you may have when you're just working with a single pianist in that solo setting was very different than conducting a rehearsal.
Right. And I think also as a pianist, you are listening to what the singers are doing on stage, right?
Yeah.
But there's also a conductor in the room, and your loyalty, let's say, is to the conductor.
Yes.
Right. And so you're pretty much following what he is doing or she is doing with the beat, right?
Yeah.
And if the singer is off, you're staying with the conductor, and you're not really as opposed to like doing a recital. There's a little bit of play, right? You can speed up or slow down, kind of ad libitum. But with the conductor, you're pretty much with him. Right.
Yeah, that's sometimes a difficult line to toe, especially when a conductor is coming in for the first time, and say the rehearsals, you've been doing blocking rehearsals for, maybe 2 weeks at that point, especially in a university setting, and then the conductor is coming in maybe a week before you're going to go on stage, so that he can essentially learn. Again, it's another collaborator that's coming in and saying, okay, what are you guys doing versus what do I have in my mind? So it's a little bit of a difficult line to toe when that conductor comes in at first, because I may sometimes follow the singer more just to kind of help them kind of feel confident in what they have been doing. And so the conductor can see, okay, this is what they've been doing. And then if he has some disagreements, then can bring that up. But also sometimes, you may... some conductors may be offended by that and will say, hey, just follow me. If the singer wants to do something different, let them bring that up. It's sometimes a difficult line to toe, especially when the conductor's first coming in.
That's awesome. So now let's turn to some of your favorite pianists or accompanists. Okay. So who are some of your favorite pianists?
The one pianist that I listened to growing up all the time, well, I don't know about all the time, but remember idolizing the most growing up was Van Cliburn.
Oh, yeah.
And to this day, I think there is still something about the color of his tone right at the piano.
Yeah.
That was, I think, is something I haven't yet seen replicated. There is a pianist nowadays, Lucas Debargue, a French pianist, who has come very close, but in a French way. He's French.
Right.
But Van Cliburn, just sort of the strength in his tone without being forceful, was something that I still love. I think that's very special. Especially his recordings of Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, when he went over to Russia and won the competition. He was the first American to win the competition.
Right.
That was somebody that I still look up to. Nowadays, I really am obsessed with Lucas Debargue. his sense of rubato, his sense of color is like nothing I've heard before. And I believe he has done some collaboration. I haven't listened to his collaborative efforts, so I need to do that. I think that'd be very interesting to hear how he approaches that.
Right.
But knowing the sort of style he brings to the solo works, I wouldn't be surprised if his collaborative efforts are similarly gorgeous.
Right. That's awesome. And they named a competition after him too, right? That's a huge
Texas,
competition for pianists, right?
Yeah.
Another pianist that I really like is Alfred Brendel.
Yeah.
So Alfred just recently passed away.
Right.
I think last week or the week before.
Right.
And he was a German pianist and an amazing pianist. And he collaborated with Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, right?
Yeah.
And just an amazing man and amazing pianist.
Yeah.
So did you ever listen to some of his works?
I have, yeah, particularly his Beethoven sonata.
Yeah, he's amazing at the Beethoven and his Schubert as well is just amazing, right?
Yeah.
So so I thought he's not only just a fantastic solo pianist, but he's also an amazing accompanist as well, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And any other favorite pianists that you like?
When it comes to collaborators, I mean, there are the sort of renowned vocal collaborative pianists.
Yeah.
Helmut Deutsch. I mean, Graham Johnson does more than German stuff, but he's very well known for his research as well into Schubert and whatnot.
Yeah.
Graham Johnson's fabulous. I need to read more of what he's done. He has such a wealth of knowledge that he can bring.
Yeah.
I think those are the two that first come to mind when it comes to collaborative pianists.
For sure. Yeah. So as a singer, when I find a pianist that is an amazing a pianist and a collaborator, I mean, I latch onto them. They're like a gem, right? Because they're for me, they're very few and far between.
Sure.
Right. So I always look for the best collaborator, and I think for you speak German fluently, and so you not only can you play like Schubert amazingly well, right, and you have the chops to play it, you understand German, and so you understand when it's strophic, when there are lots of verses, maybe you can color the piano differently depending on what the text is saying. Right? And so it helps in the expression of the music to understand what you're saying, or what the singer is singing, right?
Yeah, I mean, so we're working on Die Schöne Müllerin, right? And right out of the bat, right, you have, 7 verses that you have to, 6 or 7 verses you have to sing,
exactly,
all with a page and a half of music, and it's not the most
challenging,
ranging music, right?
Right.
It sticks with 1 and 5 for I think all of it, right? And so being able to understand the text that's going along with it, and maybe vary your articulation, maybe some dynamics, whatnot, to make it not 7 verses of boring.
Of the same thing. Exactly. Oh, that's awesome. Now let's talk about maybe some of your favorite composers.
Oh, sure.
Right. So, who are some of your favorite composers that you like to play?
As far as solo piano?
Yeah, solo piano.
It's such a difficult question because each composer brings something different to the table. I still believe that Mozart is the most heavenly music, has composed the most heavenly music. I don't think there's a note in there that we don't need. Despite whatever the movie Amadeus and will tell you that too many notes, right?
Right.
I don't believe there's a single note there that we don't need. And playing Mozart is demands such a crispness, demands such a perfection of touch on the keyboard that it makes him, in my opinion, one of the most difficult pianists. Or one of the most difficult composers to play on piano, just because you're so exposed. There's when you play Rachmaninoff, especially when you're playing a concerto, put the pedal down, and if you drop a few notes or a handful of notes, it's fine. Nobody's going to be able to know. But with Mozart, you can't do that. It'll be very obvious if you drop any notes, or if your style, your touch is not perfect, if your articulation is not exactly what it needs to be. It's ruthless, and yet I just worked with a ballet instructor this morning, playing for a class, and he reminded me of the sort of personality that Mozart demands, where it's ruthless. They nitpick every detail, and they don't give it to you very softly, right?
Right.
They'll say it how it is, but they're also inspiring and very encouraging. You know what they're going for. You know what the end result will be if you do what they're asking, and they know that as well.
Right.
And Mozart's like that, where he won't give it to you soft. It's very difficult. But both of you, Mozart and you, know what the outcome will be, and so it's inspiring.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What are some of the solo vocal works that you like to accompany? What are some composers that you like to accompany?
Too many. I mean, obviously, again, each style, each language brings something different to the table. The thing about German that I love is there's such a wide variety of styles within that language. If you look at people like Schubert, it's much more like Mozart in the sense where it's a very crisp style, and so you can't let too much drop. It has to be pretty darn near perfect. If you look at Schumann, you get more of that almost Bachian sort of contrapuntality that is difficult on the fingers at times. Still has to be clear when you're bringing out multiple voices. But then if you skip over to people like Wagner, where it's incredibly orchestral, and so you have to have this largeness of character, of sound, and yet also a great intimacy in it as well. You go to people like Strauss, where it could be labeled almost verging, and Mahler, where it's almost verging on either French Romanticism or neo-Romanticism. And there's such a wide variety in German, which is fabulous. Italian's fun. They claim opera as their own. I don't particularly love all their music, which is maybe not the nicest thing for me to say, but it's great. I love playing Verdi. Verdi's something I haven't really explored too much, but has a lot of great stuff. But as far as like vocal solo works, I think French composers still speak the most to me. It's not something that I've delved the most into. I think just because of my language experience with German, I've definitely done a lot of that. But with French, the more and more I do of French, the more and more I fall in love with it. Whether it's Ravel or Fauré, there's just or Dupac, right? I mean, that's also a language that has, I think, a broad variety of styles, and the language fits the music so well, and with such a color and style that isn't to be found anywhere else.
Right.
And it's, also the French being so romantic, and also sensual, right? That's something that obviously Germans struggle a little bit with, and Italians are pretty on the nose about it. I love the French sort of subtlety, and that's something that I'm excited to dive into.
Well, for me, there is very little music that I despise, right? I like lots of different styles, but there are definitely some things that I'm like, that's not my cup of tea, right?
Sure.
I can enjoy like Schoenberg.
Yeah.
I can appreciate it, right? Or things like Der Aufstieg und Fall der Stadt Mahagoni by Kurt Weill. That's like, I don't know. It grows on me.
Sure.
But on first listening, I'm not like, yeah, that's the best opera in the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I love Wagner.
Yeah.
I could listen to Wagner all day long.
Yeah.
Right. Puccini is amazing.
Sure.
It's just, I love like Tosca, Turandot.
Yeah.
I love the romantic composers. I love big singing. I love like dramatic singing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I gravitate to.
Yeah.
I do love like, Bach and that religious music too.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And I love singing it too. It feels good in my voice. But I think for my voice, I kind of gravitate to the larger repertoire. I love that stuff.
Yeah, and that's definitely what makes, I think, a singer's life a little bit more difficult, is as much as they may love or not love certain music, their voice may limit them to a certain fach, right?
Yeah.
It's like I know some people who have either been in or are currently in early music degrees, and they love that music, right?
Right.
They love doing cantatas. They love, doing even like Renaissance music. They love all that early music stuff.
Right.
As much as I may think that there's other stuff to explore, their voice may limit them to that. I know someone, and also maybe vice versa. I know someone who's at Yale, and I think with a little bit of work could become wildly successful as a bass baritone in the opera world. But because of his love for early music, he's chosen to really focus on that style. So, yeah, I agree. I think there's very little music not to love.
So what are some of the pianos that you like to play?
For solo works? Or just in general?
Actually for solo, and then for accompanying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really need to ask that question because the answer is the same for both. It really depends on the music that I'm working with. Yeah, that's it. It depends on the music. Well, the music I'm working with as well as the singer. I try and find the piano that can get me the tone I want for the music I'm working with. So, for example, if I'm playing Mozart or something that's a little bit braver, right?
Right.
I may want a clearer piano, but not harsh, right?
Yeah.
There are some pianos that are metallic,
right,
in not the best way, and I may not want that, right? Like I want to be able to have a warmth to the tone, and yet also a brilliance to it if need be. I may want something that, if I'm doing some other repertoire, maybe more romantic, I may want something that is farther towards the warm range, depending on the music and the singer. I think some of my favorite pianos that I've played, I was able to play a new Yamaha CFX, and I was surprised that I was able to get pretty much the entire range of what I wanted out of that piano. It had a great brilliance depending on how you played it, but also had a very wide range of colors available. The Shigeru Kawais are also fabulous. It is interesting, though, how much different pianos will change depending on the space they're in.
Right.
I was able to play on that Kawai in 2 different rooms.
Right.
And in the second room, it became slightly more wooden, which, not to the point of being unplayable, but also, it just lost a little bit of, I guess, the roundness that it had in the previous room. But, it was still a piano that I was able to get a very wide range of colors out of. Again, working with a certain singer, if they have a steelier tone, then I may want a piano that can get that as well.
Right.
Versus if they have a very warm, rich tone, a piano that is closer to that color as well, I go for that. So it just depends on what I'm looking for.
And so, and there's also variation from piano to piano, right?
Yeah.
So like sometimes a Steinway grand, there would be a different color in each of the Steinways, right?
Yeah, I've played on New York Steinways, I've played on Hamburg Steinways, and then throughout the whole length range of Steinways as well. And even going from New York to a Hamburg, the New York that I was able to play on was very bright and blocky. I mean, it would be great in a big hall with an orchestra. It has the presence and strength to really cut through.
Yeah.
For me, it was more difficult to play on because that's not my natural tone. That's a piano that I would have had to work with to get what I want out of it. The Hamburg Steinway that I've played on was much lighter in touch, and as well as slightly lighter in, not necessarily lighter, but not as harsh in tone. And while still, its touch demanded a very near perfection in the pianist's touch. Otherwise, it quickly enraged and became too much. So every piano is different, even within a brand.
And what do you think of Fazioli? How do you like those pianos?
They're nice. I've had a chance to play on at least a couple of them. They're nice. The two that I've played on that I can remember were slightly difficult because they had a very inherent warmth to them, or a very apparent and inherent warmth to them that made it unwieldy at times, because it could easily become bloated.
Yeah.
At least with my touch. Another pianist may find that perfect, right? Because of how they tend to play. I mean, they're gorgeous pianos. Their whole fourth pedal mechanism is fantastic. Being able to use a soft pedal more like an upright, where it just moves the hammers closer rather than diminishing the amount of strings it's hitting.
Right.
It's fantastic when you have faster passage work, just because you don't have to move the key down as far in order for it to hit the string. It's fun.
Have you played any of the Austrian pianos like Busendorfer?
I have, yeah. I had a chance to play the Emperor piano, the one with the 4 extra keys down the bottom.
Yeah.
It was cool. It was a cool experience. Obviously, there's nothing else really like that out there. I haven't had a chance to play any of their true concert pianos. I feel like the Emperor, they say it's a concert piano. It feels a little bit more to me like a parlor trick than sort of a cool museum piece, like look what we did, rather than here's a piano that we're going to put out on stage to work with a professional orchestra.
How's the sound and the touch?
It was nice. Maybe if I just had more time to get used to it and not feel so weirded out by the extra keys, then I might have appreciated it more.
Because you're used to it stopping here, and then it has like an extra fifth below, right?
Yeah, it was cool. Playing. I played the intro of Tchaikovsky, piano concerto. It's like, oh, cool! Like I can play lower. When you get that low, the pitch becomes a little muddy, and so it's like, oh, okay, is that really adding too much?
Right.
Or is that really adding anything in particular?
Yeah. That's awesome. And what are some funny things that you've experienced with working with singers, right? In performance or whatever, like funny things that have happened during performance.
Funny things. I feel like most people are too stressed to feel funny in performance. Funny things.
Any like weird things like something happened to the piano, or somebody fell, or something that was just like not expected.
Yeah. I mean, funny and stressful can really depend on your mood. I work with an iPad mostly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it lags behind. And so if I'll tap to the next page, I may either hit the wrong spot or think I didn't tap it, but it was just lagging. And so I tap it again and it goes 2 pages. I've heard of people using the foot pedals and them being sort of glitchy. And so when you press the pedal once, it goes 10 pages.
Oh, no.
I fortunately haven't had to deal with that, but I have definitely dealt with the not perfectly functioning iPads, or when you turn someone's paper page, it either rips out of the binder or is just loose enough that it falls. And so you're trying to, play the left hand while, trying to grab the paper from the right, and, stressful or funny.
Yeah.
Both, depending on the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And what are some, if you were, talking to a young singer,
Sure.
what kind of advice, or a young pianist, let's say, what kind of advice would you give him or her when collaborating with a singer or a pianist, vice versa? You know, either way.
Yeah. I think I would just say what I mentioned earlier is remember that you're working with somebody else.
Mhm.
And, that includes everything to, from the other person's ability. They may not be able to get everything you would want from that person. From their ability to, their knowledge, or their skill in collaborative efforts, right?
Mhm.
For example, in the university setting, I, as a pianist, may be working with singers that just don't have the technical know-how to get a certain sound or different colors out of their voice.
Mhm.
And that's okay, being aware of that. Whereas, and vice versa, right? A professional singer may be working with a pianist that may not be able to play exactly how they'd like it to be played. But just remembering that you're working with somebody else, and to keep that in mind, right? Again, you aren't the only person in that ensemble. Really listen to them both as you're making music as well as when you're discussing music, remembering that there are other opinions, that they will approach that music differently than you will. And so to listen to that, respect it, there's listening to it, but then there's also respecting it and remembering that everybody's opinion is their opinion and they're entitled to that. And that's okay. And you may be able to learn something from that.
Mhm. Good. And lastly, what's your favorite thing about being a collaborative pianist?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say my favorite thing about being a collaborative pianist is that I'm able to make music that I wouldn't otherwise be able to make.
Mm.
I can play solo works by Mozart. I can play solo works by Schubert. I can play all these solo works. But being a collaborative pianist, you're able to expand your musical vocabulary. You're able to bring to life works that you wouldn't otherwise be able to just by yourself. And there are so many works out there that just a solo pianist would miss if they never dove into collaborative works. And so I get to do that, whether that's with a singer, or with an instrumentalist, or even, as I mentioned before, I do ballet. That there are works that pianists play in ballet, and it's just you get to play stuff that you wouldn't otherwise do as a pianist, as a solo pianist.
And I think you are a people person. You like to be with people. You get along well with singers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you like them. And I think that, I think it takes a special personality to kind of get along with neurotic singers sometimes, right?
Sure. And neurotic pianists, right? Singers and neurotic pianists.
So yeah, some pianists, like solo pianists, they love being alone.
Yeah.
They're kind of like reclusive.
Sure.
They like to be stuck in their piano rehearsal room for like 5 hours,
Right.
and they're totally fine with that. And I think
Right.
other pianists, they crave like being with other people and
Sure.
making music with other people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe if there's a pianist out there that really likes to make music with other people and they're a people person, then maybe collaborative piano is the way to go, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's something to both of those. I do believe that my collaborative efforts were aided by my solo efforts. By the time that I did spend alone in a practice room, that I was able to develop my sense of individual musicality,
right?
And develop who I am as a musician, not just as a pianist, right, but as a musician. And I don't think I would have had that if I had just done collaborative piano, because then I would be stuck dealing with everybody else's idea of the music and wouldn't have had the time to really establish who I am as a musician. And that only came about because I also did solo works. So I think both are important.
That's awesome.
And for the collaborative pianists out there, don't forget that you are also an important musician as well, and that you can have your own sense of what that is.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank Peter for coming on to the podcast. And thanks for watching the video. And if you have any comments on collaborative work with singers and pianists, comment below and we'll try to address them. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.